Alright, welcome back. So, Mono Black Eldrazi, what is it? We are essentially a proactive mid-range deck. Similar decks would include things like Jund in the past. That's another good example. I think Jund is probably the best example, so I'll just leave it at that one, not to make anything more confusing. We're certainly not Jund, but we have a similar style, which is disruptive, yet aggressive. We will often be we will almost in all matchups be the person playing threats. It's simply a matter of whether we play those threats before your threats or after your threats. But we are not, we're either going to react to your threats with our cards, or we're going to try to get them out in front, and that completely depends on what our opponents are doing. If our opponents are a control deck, we're going to be the aggressor. If our opponents are an aggro deck, or even most mid-range decks, we're going to generally be the control matchup in those scenarios. And we almost get to do that flawlessly without knowing what the matchup is, just the way our cards play out. You will make some small value judgments or judgment plays along the way. Whether you transgress the mind or play a smuggler's copter or something. But outside of those small decisions, for the most part, your stuff like your matter reshapers and your thought not seers and your reality smashers and your scrap heap scroungers and like those cards are just fine. Period. Play them and be good to go. So that's what the kind of level we're going to be at from right now, discussing each individual card. So the first plan of attack with this deck is always, first and foremost, to attack the opposing hand. And so we want to do that in multiple ways, and we want to do that at different mana costs. And this is important because you don't want to imagine every single hand disruption card you had cost 2. It would be really difficult to fit hand disruption in at all places of your curve. You obviously couldn't play it on turn 1. Playing it on turn 3 would be really awkward because you'd be giving up a 3-drop opportunity instead. Playing it on turn 4 is pretty prime if you have 2 copies of the card, because obviously in that spot you're getting maximum mana. But if you only have 1, it's another awkward card. So it's a lot better if you're able to somehow have your hand disruption split up in mana costs to allow you to attack various parts of your opponent's hand at various parts in your curve without sacrificing too much. So we started at Harsh Scrutiny, whose primary role is to be a 1-drop hand disruption spell. It's really the only one in the format that is valuable. I think it is also one of the strongest cards in the format right now because of how heavily creatures are used in the format. The combo decks use creatures. The control decks use important creatures like Torrential Gearhulk or the 0/4. I think that this is just generally a good card, but it's very important because it is a 1-drop hand disruption card in our deck full of other hand disruption. So we have hand disruption at 2-drops slots and 4-drop slot. So getting one in a 1-drop slot is very valuable to us. It gives us a 1-cost play. The Scry is valuable against every single matchup, so we can get away with running a couple of these. Even if you whiff, you're not even necessarily sad about it. It's going to be really important against aggro decks to disrupt their strongest, fastest draws. That's why we have a third one over here on the sideboard. It's going to be good against Delirium because you can take their Emrakul's along with Ishkana and all that stuff. They do have some ways to bring that stuff back, but it's still better to have it in the graveyard than in their hand, generally speaking. And against control, snagging a Gearhulk or Ludwig's Test Subject or whatever. What is that guy's name? It's not Ludwig's Test Subject. That's what it used to be called. Thing in the Ice? Thing in the Ice. In both those worlds, Harsh Scrutiny is fine. And even if you do whiff against control, you still get value off of seeing their hand, which can have a bunch of counter magic. Additionally, the Scry, again, always important. Then I'm going to continue talking about the hand disruption because we move to our 2-drop slots. We have Transgress the Mind. All of our cards kind of serve a double purpose. So again, this card is important because it costs 2 and it disrupts their hand, which is the more hand disruption you have to a point, it adds up. So stripping 3 cards from your opponent's hand over the course of 4 turns is so much more valuable than stripping 1 card over the course of 4 turns. It adds up to a point where your opponent can literally not play spells for you. If you hit point like your opponent's 2-drop, their 3-drop, and their 4-drop, for example, or their 2-drop and both their 4-drops, you could literally cause them to not make any plays or gain any advantages until turn 5 or beyond. Whereas if you only had a single removal spell in there, you might like stop their 4-drop because it's the most powerful card, or you might choose to stop their 2-drop because it's the cheapest card. But you don't really have a way to like cold them all together. You have to choose, you know, the worst enemy, or the best possible choice for you, your worst enemy at that time, and move on. As you stack up more hand hate, you now get to develop plans. When you open up your hand and you have Harsh Scrutiny, Transgress the Mind, Thought-Knot Seer, which is not uncommon. If you have that, you get to cast your Harsh Scrutiny on turn 1 and go, okay, they have 2 creatures, so I know I'm taking one of those with Harsh Scrutiny. I get to choose the cheap one because I know I'm playing a Transgress the Mind next turn, which can snag the Tireless Tracker. By taking the Tireless Tracker, I know they have nothing. All these 2 pump spells in their hand are completely dead, so I'm not worried about them. And then if they don't draw a creature immediately, the Thought-Knot Seer can come down and take that out. But even if that doesn't happen, he could snag this Planeswalker that's in their hand. So I don't need to use my Transgress on the Planeswalker because the Thought-Knot Seer will come down first. So you get to develop this plan of hand disruption, and then everything just kind of works out. So Transgress the Mind is valuable just because it costs 2. And then in addition to that, it exiles things, which is hugely important in our deck, primarily for Wasteland Strangler, which we have up to a 4 of. I'll get to that later. But very important to exile things. Also helps against Delirium, where, you know, not being in the graveyard matters. And overall, I think just a valuable card. Great against control, great against all the mid-range decks, great against combo decks. Sometimes pretty bad against aggro. That's the one place you'll board it out. Like energy aggro, you'll board out a couple. And there's some of the like hyper aggro, 1-drop, 2-drop aggro decks that you'll board down to maybe 1 or even 0 of these. But for the most part, they're good in most matchups. Collective Blessing is another 2-drop hand disruption spell. And it's played, again, all of our cards try to serve multiple purposes. It's played because it serves a bajillion purposes. Not literally, it serves like 3 or 4. But it is an extremely versatile card. It gives us the ability to discard irrelevant cards, whether those be extra copies of Smuggler's Copter, because you usually only want 1, maybe 2, Scrap Heap Scroungers, just because they have graveyard synergies, extra copies of Hand Disruption after your opponent's hand is kind of low, whatever it may be. It lets you get rid of those for valuable things. A little bit of removal, a little bit more Hand Disruption. In this case, hitting the opposite thing of what Harsh Scrutiny hits, so you can, again, use this in a planning way and be like, okay, Harsh Scrutiny is going to take your cheap creature, Collective Brutality is going to follow up by taking their removal spell, then I can play the Thought-Knot Seer that's not going to die to their instant speed removal spell, and their Thought-Knot Seer could take their Planeswalker. Like, you could set up these lines of play. The Drain Life is valuable on both ends. We're aggressive enough that draining for 2 it matters. Gaining 2 life in an aggro matchup will often matter. Great card overall. None in the sideboard this time, just 2 in the main, but I think it's worth it. So I'm going to jump straight up to Thought-Knot Seer and cover the last of the hand disruption, because again, we do have, this is 12 hand disruption cards if you count them all. 4 Thought-Knot Seer, 4 Transgress the Mind, and then 4 copies between Collective Brutality and Harsh Scrutiny. That is, no deck in the format has that much hand disruption. Some decks have that much counter magic and whatnot, but that is just an absurd amount of hand disruption, and it really is one of our key elements to our deck. Jund, when it was a deck, I think it had a little bit of hand disruption. I can't remember. Oh, yeah, Blightning, of course. Blightning was an important card for that deck, and you would win if you ever did cast double Blightnings because of how much the opposing hand would be disrupted, because of what they would lose in the process. So we kind of want to do the same thing, except we don't have a card as powerful as Blightning. I guess Thought-Knot Seer might be as powerful as Blightning, but instead of trying to just get card advantage off of a 2-for-1 off of some generic kind of, or a 3-for-1 in Blightning's case, off of a card. We're instead trying to specifically pinpoint things and take them out and disrupt our opponent's play enough so that our Smuggler's Copters and Thought-Knot Seers and Reality Smashers can get in there and get in damage. So Thought-Knot Seer is kind of the king of all of this hand disruption, because he comes down last, he deals with anything. He is vulnerable, where the rest of them are not vulnerable. But the important thing is, even though he's vulnerable, you can still disrupt a game plan with it. Even if you know this is going to get killed instantly and draw your opponent a card, you at least know you dealt with whatever that problematic thing was. You took the World Breaker out of their hand before they could cast it, and now it's in exile, which is a great place for it to be. Or you took the Aether Marvel Works out of their hand, and you don't care if you're giving them a random card. Like, you would Vendilion click that Marvel Works if you could. 100%. If you could just activate it or play a Vendilion click, trigger it, and steal that Marvel Works and give your opponent a random card for sure, 100%, you would do that because the Marvel Works is so important. Thought-Knot Seer doesn't even necessarily cost you that card. It still asks that your opponent have removal and do something else. So don't necessarily be thrown off by like, oh, I'm going to play as Thought-Knot Seer and there's a chance it's going to die. That is not the end of the world. The card still has value. Also, it's a 4/4. Every card in the deck gets affected by Ruins of Thornreef, which we'll talk about a little bit later. This just keep it in mind when you're building these plans with your hand disruption, because it is the vulnerable card. So if you need to take that removal spell with your Collective Brutality, do it. If you need to take the creature that can block Thought-Knot Seer effectively with Harsh Scrutiny, so that way your Thought-Knot Seer can attack, do that. Just keep these small things in mind, and Thought-Knot Seer is going to be important. Another thing to keep in mind, Thought-Knot Seer is another card that exiles things, again, for Wasteland Strangler, which does matter. And it also matters against a lot of the various decks in the format, the graveyard-based decks, and Embercools, and all that stuff. Alright. This deck is, there's a lot going on, and I think you can pick up most of these things in games, but I just wanted to kind of break things down in a little more detail in this video, because I know some people appreciate this rather than text, and I know I speak fast and whatnot, but hopefully you can hit a little back button on YouTube enough times that it'll get in there. Alright, we'll talk about our kind of generic threat package real quick, because I think they're the least interesting part of the deck, and they're mostly in here because of what they because of the consistency they offer, more than like how interesting they are or how in depth they are. So Scrapheap Scrounger is probably the least interesting card in the deck in terms of his role. He's just an aggressively costed body that has great synergies in the deck, and is an awesome threat against control, because he gets to come back all the time. And like I said, just has a million synergies with the deck. He works with Ruins of Thornreef because he's colorless. He comes back from, or he gets discarded to Smuggler's Copter or Key to the City, and then can come back from the graveyard after that. He gets put into play off Matter Reshaper. He taps to pilot a copter pretty well. Just a cheap creature, just all around, nothing amazing. He's not the best card in the deck by any means, but he's just going to provide great. I don't know what I'm saying. He's, I guess, it's a weird, whatever it is. It's just a great all-around utility card that, at the end of the day, if all else fails, it's just a 2-cost 3/2 that beats down. We are an aggressive deck, so it is important to get in damage whenever you can, because the lower your opponent is, the more likely a Reality Smasher is going to come down and finish them, or something along that nature. Excuse me. Scrapheap Scrounger also, it's important to remember that it comes back at instant speed, and it works with Ruins of Thornreef out of the graveyard. So if you can set up a scenario where you're returning this at the end of your opponent's turn, and then you're putting some counters on it with Ruins of Thornreef, that is a huge amount of damage swing. You can get a 5/4 out of nowhere, which is just that something like that happening can just change an entire game around. Protects you against wrath effects and sweepers a lot. All around great card, but like I said, it's not super interesting in that it's all of its uses are pretty obvious for the most part in this deck. Matter Reshaper is another one of those, basically the same thing. Another great utility card with a lot of synergy in the deck. Puts a bunch of different things into play, including Bear of Silence. You usually don't want to put Bear of Silence into play, because it has a cast trigger, so keep that in mind. Sometimes you will, because you want to get a couple damage in, but keep in mind that you usually don't want to put this in play because it is a cast trigger. Wasteland Strangler, on the other hand, is not a cast trigger. It's strange. It's an enters the battlefield trigger, so that one's fine to put into play off Matter Reshaper. So keep those in mind. Those are two different things. Wasteland Strangler acceptable, Bear of Silence is not acceptable. And then everything else that you can put into play off Wasteland or off Matter Reshaper, excuse me, you usually will. That includes Smuggler's Copter, that includes Scrapheap Scrounger, that includes Key to the City, and that includes lands. The exception to that being, if you have something like a Smuggler's Copter online and you already have a bunch of lands in play, you might want to put a land or something in your hand just so you can discard. There are reasons. You can figure them out, obviously. But for the most part, you will always put the Matter Reshaper thing in play. The exceptions being Wasteland Stringers that you don't want to trigger yet, like your opponent has other creatures and you want to save the exile card or whatever, or Bear of Silences that you want to trigger because they do not have the ability to trigger if you put them into play off Matter Reshaper. Again, works with Ruins of Thornreef. Outside of that, no, pretty generic. All right, next we'll get to Wasteland Strangler since he's got a lot of shout-outs so far. So with all this guy's tentacles going on, his main role, and the reason he's up to 4 of, is that he's great against aggro and mid-range. by providing a 2-for-1 body that just has synergy out the wazoo in this deck. And by synergy, I'm talking about Ruins of Oran-Reef, making him much larger than he should be. I'm talking about with his ability to come down, kill a creature, and immediately activate a Smuggler's Copter. That is actually very, very important synergy in a deck like this. If you could take out their flying blocker and get a pilot for your copter for the same 3 mana, that is a huge swing a lot of times that not very many cards can provide. Additionally, we have ways to exile things with Transgress the Mind and Thought-Knot Seer. So we have means of enabling this. And all around great card. Even if you're not occasionally getting the ability, the trigger, you can still just be happy with your 3/2 that gets a couple counters off Ruins of Oran-Reef or whatever. Also, he's devoid. All these black cards that are devoid are especially nice in our deck because we get the additional Corrupted Crossroads to cast them. So there is that value in Wasteland Strangler over being just a traditional black card. Excuse me. Alright, moving up to, we're going to skip Bearer, because that's not a generic threat. Wasteland Stringer really wasn't a generic threat either, but it was right there when there was a million shoutouts to it. Reality Smasher is probably the most boring card in the deck in terms of its use. Its only use is to end games. Obviously, there will be a couple situations where you'll need to play defensive with this, and it does a decent job of being a defensive creature because it's not going to just necessarily die to a removal spell right away and then not be able to block. That said, it is primarily going to be used as a gigantic win condition. 5/5 Trample Haste with an ability that protects it, wins games, and our deck does want to close out games pretty quickly. Even though we have a lot of disruption, and even though we have a lot of 2-for-1s and ways to gain card advantage, because we're centered on hand disruption primarily, with Harsh Scrutinies, all that whole package we were talking about, sorry, these cards, that means our opponents can eventually top deck out of that, and we have the tools to beat them still. We can Bearer Silence them, we can Wasteland Strangler them, we can still win through that, but there is a chance that our opponents can string together some amount of plays or something that they come back into the game and win, and we maybe brick on a couple lands or something like that. We don't have counter spells to store up in our hand and to deal with literally any threat. We don't have gigantic draw 7s like Sphinx's Revelation to refill us and win a game from when we finally run out of cards. We're kind of nickel and diming our opponents. So the ability to actually take that advantage and win the game quickly is extremely important to a deck like this. It was important to a deck like Jund, which could do it with its Putrid Leeches and its Sprouting Thrynax and its Brewmate Dragons or whatever. It could be on the back foot for most of the game, and then play a Bloodbraid Elf, or block with a Sprint Thrynax on your creature, get its 3/1/1s, play a Bloodbraid Elf, hit some bolt effect or whatever, kill your creature, get in for 6 damage, next turn play another Bloodbraid Elf or a Putrid Leech, activate a Raging Ravine, whatever it was, deal another 10 damage, and the game was over. Like, it didn't disrupt you and then just let you sit there and build back up, because it really might not be able to sustain all that. Like I said, it didn't have gigantic control mechanisms and planeswalkers and stuff doing all this craziness. It really relied on, nickel and diming you, and it just had so many great cards that did it that it took over games that way. And we are very, very much in the same. And so Reality Smasher is kind of our Bloodbraid Elf, if you will, where Bloodbraid Elf is a significantly better card. Don't get me wrong, Reality Smasher is great, but Bloodbraid Elf is in its own league. But it's in the scenarios I was talking about, it is the Bloodbraid Elf there. We're taking it where we're like, okay, this game we've pulled ahead far enough that we want to end things. We have one card left in our hand. Almost always, it's going to be Reality Smasher if that's the case. Let's pump the gas or step on the gas and end this thing as quickly as possible, so that way our opponent doesn't have a chance to get back into it. This will come down. Sometimes it'll get a Ruins of Oran-Reef counter, which is excellent, but almost always it'll be the biggest thing in play, and its goal is simply to end the game as quickly as possible. There are some matchups where that is not a great thing, and you'll board this out for those matchups, specifically hyper aggro decks. That's actually one of the reasons that we had to run Sky Sovereign and took out one of the Reality Smashers from the main deck, is that it's not always the best card, but it's rarely a bad card. It might not be the best card in a specific matchup, but a 5/5 Trample Haste is still got value, and it can still, take over a game. Sometimes you'll be racing an aggro deck. You'll be light on removal and just have a couple of Scroungers and maybe a Bearer of Silence. None of those creatures can block. And you'll just play a Reality Smasher with another one in hand and just, literally just saying, okay, I'm going to race you. Like, you attack me, I can't block. I'm attacking back. We've been breaking even. Can you beat these 2 Reality Smashers that are going to kill you in 2 turns? And that sometimes wins. It happens pretty regularly. But outside of that job, Reality Smasher really doesn't do anything. So that's the story. All right, we have Bearer of Silence, which is a mainstay in the deck. I put it in the 4-drop slot because almost always you're going to at least wait to see if you should kick it. Yes, you can have 2 of these, and you can be tempted to play it on turn 2, but our deck is not so aggressively minded that you want to make that play. You almost would always at least entertain the opportunity to get a 2-for-1 off Bearer of Silence. By just finding out what your opponent's playing, giving them some time to establish an archetype. If they're playing some super control deck, like a deck with 3 Torrential Gearhulks and no other creatures, then sure, play a Bearer of Silence with the Ruins of Roaring Reef out, get yourself a 3/2, maybe activate a Smuggler's Copter. If you played a Smuggler's Copter and you have no other creatures, of course you can play Bearer of Silence. And in that world, by all means, if you have a valid reason to do so. Mostly what I'm arguing against is just playing the aggressive Bearer of Silence that's just trying to attack. That is generally not a good play. You would, at least not for this style of deck. And you almost always want to be seeking that 2-for-1. Even if it's not realized, you want to at least entertain the opportunity it might be realized. Give it a little bit of time. And then if you're like, okay, they're playing a really light creature deck and I have 2 Bearer of Silence, maybe hold on to one of them, because 1 Bearer of Silence is almost always good in almost any matchup. But if you draw 2, be like, okay, maybe I want to throw this one out there, put a counter on it, and get some power aggression down, see if it eats or move a spell, whatever. That's totally valid. My point is just simply, if you don't know the matchup, don't just run out of Bearer of Silence on turn 2. You will often regret it. Again, keep in mind this is a cast trigger. That means that the ability is uncounterable. That means your opponent cannot save their Torrential Gearhulk, even if they do just dissipate this. This card also only hits your opponent's creatures, no matter if you had a creature out or not. So if your opponent casts this off an Emrakul, they don't have the ability to make you sacrifice one of your creatures. They, of course, will skip over the sacrifice trigger, but it's better than you losing your own guy. The dream, of course, is that you top deck one of these, or you have one of these in your hand, or multiple of these in your hand, whatever it is, and you take out your opponent's Emrakul with it, which is totally an available play to make. But for the most part, this is a really solid card. A flyer, which is good for an aggressive deck. And another great one at enabling Copter. All these creatures that can't block kind of are freebies to tap the Copter. You don't feel bad because you're like, oh, I can't block with anything. Well, it's like, okay, you can either attack with your Copter and loot, or you can block with your Copter and loot. You don't have to worry about whether you block with these or not. All right, let's jump back. We have 2 1-ofs to discuss. I'm going to jump back to Key to the City, which is down to a 1-of. The second one in the sideboard. A bunch of these cards have stuff in the sideboard, so we're going to talk about in a second. Key to the City. I went down to 1 of it specifically because the metagame felt like it got a little more aggressive, which is why I added the 4th Wasteland Strangler. That was ultimately that swap, was the second Key to the City for the 4th Wasteland Strangler. I think the last time I showed the deck, it only had 2 Wasteland Stranglers, but I went up to 3, tested it all week, and then went up to 4 recently. Key to the City's role, it's always a draw spell. That has synergy with things like Scrapheap Scroungers, which is pretty good. So you can just always use it as a tome and just loot away your extra hand disruption or your extra lands or your Scroungers. There is that option, so it doesn't come up often against aggro decks, but against mid-range decks and control, it will be a primary use of Key to the City. But this also provides a lot of burst damage with things like Thought-Knot Seer and Reality Smasher, especially against boards of Ishkana or just a bunch of 1/1s or a bunch of aggro creatures or whatever it may be. It just gives you closing speed, which, as I pointed out, we often want to end games quicker rather than sooner rather than later. And it's just one of those cards to really help us sneak in some of our bigger ground creatures and ensure some damage. All around, pretty useful card. I would not say essential to the deck. I could see a world where we don't end up putting these in the main deck, but so far I've been pretty happy with 2. I'm trying 1 just to mix things up and give me a little bit of a different feel, but we'll see where this goes in the future. It's good. Its best use, of course, is going to be in control. Against aggro, you often board it out. Against hyper aggro, at least, you often board it out. Although it's far from useless, you just often board it out. And then the mid-range decks, it's gonna matter depending on what you're playing. Against combo, you generally want to board it out. It's kind of a no-go there. And our last one of, which is a brand new card that no one's seen in this bad boy yet, is Sky Sovereign Console Flagship. We're playing it over one of the Reality Smashers, and the idea here is that this is more of a controlling 5-drop. The Reality Smashers serve their particular role pretty well. They're obviously a very good card, but as it gets said, they're kind of one-dimensional in terms of what they're doing. Sky Sovereign, on the other hand, is very, very far from one-dimensional. Comes down, eats something immediately. That could be a Planeswalker, which our deck can have trouble with occasionally. I mean, Reality Smashers is good against Planeswalkers too, so it's not like this is an exclusive Sky Sovereign ability, but it does deal with Planeswalkers. Or it kills important creatures. 3 damage is a pretty relevant thing. Wasteland Strangler is obviously already dealing with 3 toughness. This is an additional thing to deal with 3 toughness. But all around, having immediate impact on the board that does more than just attack is important. Again, it's another flyer, so we can block flyers with it. Crew 3 is not difficult for this deck. Scrounger has 3 health or 3 strength. Naturally, we got 3 power Mana Reshapers. We got 3 power Wasteland Stranglers. We got 4 power Thought-Knot Seers. Obviously, you're probably not tapping Reality Smasher to Flagship. That's fine. And then also we have Copter over here, rocking its 3/3 self. So if you ever do have a situation where you have like Bearer of Silence and not a counter on it, if you throw it in a Copter, then the Copter can jump in the Flagship, and then you get a whole air party. Yeah, all in all, great. Again, you can put. I didn't mention this with Copter, but I'll mention it now with Sky Sovereign. You can put counters with Ruins of Oran-Reef on your Copters or your Flagships as long as the turn you play the card, you crew it. So you won't be able to obviously attack with the card. But if I play a Copter, and then that turn I go ahead and throw a Bearer of Silence, let's say, into the Copter, I can go ahead and Ruins of Oran-Reef the Copter and make it a 4/4, and it'll be a 4/4 for the rest of the time it's in play. But of course, I can't attack with it that turn. It has Summoning Sickness. But that's the one way you can get that to work. And occasionally it comes up. I would say, maybe 5% of games that comes up, but it's relevant. So keep it in mind. All right, that's our creatures, or that's our spells. Let's quickly go over our lands. 4 Aether Hub, don't cut it. We want colorless mana and we want black mana. This is probably the best of the bunch, so just don't cut it. Blighted Fen. This is a one of, and probably the most controversial land, so I'll just mention it now. This might become a swamp. I did win multiple games this week, specifically because of this Blighted Fen, dealing with Ornithal and other random stuff. But if you're playing this deck a bunch and you're really desperate for more black sources, you can easily cut the Blighted Fen. If you want another colorless source and not Blighted Fen, if you want to do something else, I highly recommend Seagate Wreckage as your option here. But in either case, I wouldn't run more than 1 or 2 of that slot. I think this is pretty good right now. It has been good for me as a one of just to finish my creature sweep removal, giving me a 5th Edict. But if your taste is, Seagate Wreckage or a swamp, feel free. 4 Corrupted Crossroads, don't cut them. Important. They cast your Flame Tendrils in the sideboard, which makes it way easier to cast. Your Wasteland Stranglers in the main deck, your Transgresses, your Bearers, your there's one more. Oh no, they don't cast. Do they cast this? Read. Only cast a spell with Devoid. This does not have Devoid, so they do not help you pay for a Mindbender, which is worth noting. I've never had that interaction come up before, but it's worth pointing out. They cannot pay for a merge on a Mindbender. Crumbling Vestige. Very, very, very similar to Aether Hub in theory, in that it gives you 1 black mana 1 time. However, it forcing you to get the black mana on the turn you cast it is a giant downside in a lot of cases, although as the game goes on, it's not too big of a deal. It's great on turn 1 for Harsh Scrutinies. It's great on turn 2 for your Transgress the Minds, Collective Brutalities. It's great later on as well. You can also just play it early if you need to. Like, let's say you have 2 Swamps, Crumbling Vestige, and that's it. And you have a Thought-Knot Seer in your hand. If you drew a 4th land and it was a Swamp or a Crumbling Vestige, or I guess a Crumbling Vestige is not a good idea. If you drew a 4th land and it was a swamp, and you held your Crumbling Vestige, in your hand, then you would not have a colorless mana for the Thought-Knot Seer, because the turn you play the Vestige, it can't produce colorless. It'll produce a black. So there are situations where this being colorless is more important than it providing a black, so you sneak it out early, even if you don't use the black mana, just to get the colorless to play a Matter Reshaper, or to play a Thought-Knot Seer, or to play a Reality Smasher. But again, it also provides a black, so you generally want to hold it, but there are a couple times, just keep it in mind, it is a flexible card. It's probably the most interesting land in terms of when you play it, in terms of timing. So just keep it in mind, play with it a lot. Think about its uses. Plan your as soon as you get it in your hand. Plan for, like, do I need this? Am I going to need the colorless? Am I going to need the black? What turn am I going to need the black? What turn am I going to need the colorless? Plan it all ahead immediately. At least get an idea, because if you don't do that, you can screw up with this land very, very easily, and then walk yourself into a bad spot. This card is especially important in the post board when you have Flame Tendrils, Liliana, Obnixilis, a bunch of double black cards coming in. So just keep it in mind. Like I said, most important land in the deck, probably in terms of execution by the player. 6 swamps. I think 6 is that where we're at. Yeah, 6 right now. Could go to 7. I don't think I'd go more than 7, but 7 might be reasonable. And then Ruins of Oran-Reef, 4 of them. Most important land in the deck, best land in the deck, arguably the best card in the deck. It will not matter in every game. Games where you curve out perfectly, those games exist, and Ruins of Oran-Reef will be useless there. Don't get too greedy, where you have to get every counter possible and every creature possible. But at the same time, be smart. Like, some games are going to go long and you're not going to win on turn 6, and you getting 2 extra counters because you just slowed down your curve by 1 turn, and you instead of playing Scrounger on turn 2, you played Transgress the Mind. You went turn 1 Ruins of Oran-Reef, turn 2 Transgress the Mind, turn 3 Scrounger plus a counter, turn 4 Matter Reshaper plus a counter. Because you chose to do that, those counters could be crucial. Maybe they save you from a Kozilek's return or Flame Tendrils. Maybe they deal crucial amounts of damage. Maybe they force an opponent to play to not play Planeswalker. Whatever it is, it could be absolutely crucial to your success. Again, there are some games though where you're going to curve out, and that's fine. But just keep in mind the value that Ruins of Oran-Reef has as the game goes on, and the value it can provide even immediately. Making your Thought-Knot Seers into a 5/5 is one of the most valuable things you can do in the format. It survives Grasp of Darkness at that point. It survives Chandra's -3 ability at that point. It survives Radiant Flames shenanigans. It survives Galvanic Bombardment, all that stuff. So there's just a lot of value behind Ruins of Oran-Reef. I would never cut it. People ask me all the time if you can cut them. Please do not cut this card. If you do not know how, it's the only land that guaranteed comes into play tapped, because the 4 Crumbling Vestige produce mana on the turn that you play them. So this is the only land that actually does not produce mana on the turn you play it. So if you can't play a deck that has 4 tap lands in it, and understand when to play the lands to fit it in, especially a deck that really doesn't have any 1-drops, it only has a couple. If you can't figure out when to sneak in these 4 tap lands, like, what are you doing playing any of the 3 4-color decks that are out there that run 12 tap lands and have to figure out exactly when to play? Like, you remember Vivid Land Control back in the day? Like, you guys, you have to learn how to play with 4 tap lands. It's not that difficult. You just have to be smart with them. I promise you, they're important beyond all belief. Do not cut them. All right, that was my plea. All right, moving to the sideboard. Harsh Scrutiny, we already discussed it. You bring in the 3rd against most decks. Obviously not against the control decks with just a couple of Gear Hulks, and not against stuff like Aether Marvel Works, but sometimes against Aether Marvel Works, depending on the build, but often not. But against hyper aggro, mid-range, bringing that in. Pick the Brain comes in against combo and control primarily. You're not often worried about the Delirium, although if you get it, that's great. More importantly, it's just basically a 5th Transgress the Mind. Kind of view it like that. Flame Tendrils. Extremely important. Changes your deck momentum and your style completely. You become a sort of control deck with this card available. You can do things like bring in your Distended Mindbenders, your Obnixilis, your Liliana, and we'll get to all these in a second. But you could basically morph your deck into a sort of controlling deck. This is great against the graveyard strategies like Delirium, or the discard deck that has like Prized Amalgam and Haunted Dead and stuff. Great against those style of decks. Great against all the aggro decks, energy decks, tokens decks. They're all out there, and this is great against them. Even against the mirror match, this could be amazing against any style of mirror match where you're taking out Scrap Heap Scroungers and Matter Reshapers, not getting their triggers off. You're killing Wasteland Stranglers and Bearer of Silence. You're fine card in all sorts of matchups. Just keep in mind when you bring it in. Be smart. Don't run out your turn 2 Scrap Heap Scrounger when you know you're going to play a Flame Tendrils on turn 3 or 4. Play your stuff with Runes of War and Reef out to get it bigger, to protect it, or just slow roll it, whatever you need to do. But yeah, great card. Just it's transformational. One Liliana and one Ob Nixilis. They're different cards, but they serve very similar purposes. They're both coming against control to give you some card advantage and some long game. And they're going to come in and get in matchups where they kill things that's relevant. For Ob Nixilis, that's most mid-range decks or like one creature style, one creature decks. Like Energy, for example, is usually a one creature deck because we are doing things like dealing with our small guys with our Wasteland Stranglers and Collective Brutalities and Bearer of Silence. So often they get to the mid or late game with just one creature in play because they have so many pump spells in their deck that it's not like they're just their hands full of creatures just playing more. So I consider that a one creature deck, one creature style deck. But against a red-white vehicles, for example, this might be a little too slow. I can see not bringing it in there because you already have a Sky Sovereign in that matchup. You're going to probably put out your Reality Smashers, but you don't necessarily need to bring in another 5-drop. But it is there for that. Mostly here for control. But then you have Liliana, which is kind of doing a very similar thing, but better against aggro. Obviously better against 1 toughness creatures. Still great against control. Definitely comes in there. Both of these are double black cards that don't get tapped for with Corrupted Crossroads. So keep that in mind. Pay attention with your Crumbling Vestige, and often when you're bringing these cards in, you're going to want to bring in the Pilgrim's Eye. That is why it's here. It is here as an additional black source specifically for your Distended Mindbenders. That's where the big combo comes in. We'll get to them in a second. But also for these 2 double black cards. So when you bring these cards in, you'll often be bringing in Distended Mindbenders. But even if you're not, keep the Pilgrim's Eye in mind for these so that you have an additional swamp. Some people, you could justify playing a swamp over Pilgrim's Eye, but because Pilgrim's Eye is so amazing with Distended Mindbender, I wanted to play it instead. So the combo here, frame it with a combo, it's more of a synergy, here is that you play this on turn 3, fetch a swamp, because you need 2 swamps, and then on turn 4, you get to play a Distended Mindbender emerged. You got one of the swamps towards its emerge cost, which is great, and then you reduced its emerge cost from 7 down to 4 because of the Pilgrim Eye costing 3. So you have like a nice little curve there that's just a great follow-up to like say a turn 2 Scrap Heap Scrounger or something, or a turn 2 Copter is even best. Turn 2 Copter, turn 3 Pilgrim's Eye, activate Copter attack, turn 4 Distended Mindbender, activate Copter attack. It's just like crazy start to a game that you're going to just beat any control deck. They're not going to use the removal spell on your turn 3 Pilgrim's Eye, so that way you can't cast Mindbender. So that's really the kind of standout spot where Pilgrim's Eye comes in. But it is an artifact creature. It does get counters from Runes of War and Reef. That's relevant. And yeah, just all around a little solid dude. Mostly in here when you want a 24th mana source. 1 Titan's Presence, mostly for the combo kind of all-in pumped style decks and energy, but also fine against decks where you're trying to exile things. I could easily see this end up getting cut in the near future, but I'm still giving it a shot. It's mostly just here as like kind of a one-off removal spell doing its thing. No real purpose is kind of why I'm thinking about cutting it. Mindbenders, we already discussed how they work, sort of, or what the best way to use them, but not really where they come in. They come in any control matchup where their ability seems relevant, which should be most of them. Like some control decks will just not play like cheap cards, for example, and you're like, oh, do I want to bring in Mindbender to go on top of my Transgressor Minds and my Collective Brutalities and my Thought-Knot Seers and my Pick the Brain, or am I good enough on Hand Disruption because my opponent's just not likely to have anything? That could be true, but most of the time, the blowout of this on turn 4, with all of our 3-drops, we have 4 Wasteland Stranglers and 4 Matter Reshapers. The blowout that causes against things like Aether Marble Works, for example, or against things like Blue-White Flash, where you are taking a Spell Queller and a some 4-drop or an Avacyn, for example. When you take Spell Queller Avacyn with Distended Mind Bender, that is absurd. Like, the game's over, and you have a 5/5 in play. So this can come in and be an absolute havoc in a lot of those styles of matchups. It is terrible against aggro. It is terrible against some hyper mid-range decks like the what's it called, the Panharmonica. I think it's pretty bad there because they tend to play super cheap cards, and the only more expensive card you can ever nab that I could tell at least is Panharmonica. Or Panharmonicon. I'm sorry, I call it Panharmonica as a joke, and I realize people don't know what card I'm talking about. I think that deck, at least the last time I looked at it, it only played like 4 Panharmonicon and like maybe 4 Glimmer of Genius or something like that, but then everything else was cheap. So I was worried that Distended Mind Bender would just be such a miss that you would just play it and get one card way too often. And oftentimes, those one cards would already be taken care of by all your other stuff, or would just be better for you to cast a Thought-Knot Seer on that same turn. So I didn't bring it into those matchups, and it felt fine because I had enough disruption. So ultimately, just pay attention to what's going on. But I think this is a very valuable card that you will bring in very, very often. And it kind of turns you into your control deck just because of how powerful it is. One more key to the city. A lost artifact of being the second one in the main deck. I don't know if it'll stay here, but I'm trying it out. One Reality Smasher comes in against control, does the same thing that the main decks ones do. It wants to end games quickly. So in any matchup where you feel the game cannot go long, like potentially aggro, potentially combo, potentially control, those two matchups, depending on the specific matchup, bring it in, beat face. One Warping Wheel, kind of a catch-all spell. It exiles things for your Wasteland Stranglers. It counters wrath effects against control. It creates a 1/1 instant speed, which works with your Ruins of Worn Reef, so you can create a 2/2 or a 3/3 instant speed. Also, the 1/1 has extra value in this deck because of the Smuggler's Copters. Also, the 1/1 can be sacrificed for a colorless mana, which means you can ramp to a turn 3 Thought-Knot Seer. It just does all kinds of little things. If you ever feel like there's a matchup where multiple of those things matter, or one of those things matters so much, like the exile a creature with power or toughness 1 or less, for example, if any of these abilities matter so much, or multiple of them matter, you often just bring it in and kind of use it as a stand-in for Collective Brutality. Again, it is a card that could be cut, but I generally love it, and I'm going to keep it around for right now. One Spatial Contortion. This is, I added this to mostly deal with more opposing Thopters. Collective Brutality doesn't do that in the main deck, and Wasteland Strangler doesn't do that very well. Granted, we can just deal with the creatures that activate the Thopters, but sometimes Thopters get away from us. So I have one of these to help deal with that. Also deals with creature lands, and it helps against like the energy decks and the aggro decks and whatnot. In general, I thought the aggro decks were a little more prevalent, so that is why I moved to the 4th Wasteland Strangler main deck, and our sideboard has a little bit more controlling elements, or control fighting elements, excuse me. But I still think this is probably the best setup for right now, and I've been talking for a very long time. I know I went into heavy detail there, but I think that is pretty important for if you're going to play the deck to really understand the thought process behind all these choices, so you at least understand kind of what the cards are attempting to do. So now we're going to go play a few games. I'll shut up, and we'll be right back to test out Mono Black Eldrazi in Standard. Conley Woods for TCG Player. Be right back.